Columbia Public Library, and which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with Rudi Keller, Deputy Editor for the Missouri Independent. Today's Lunch and Learn is co-hosted by the Library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. And I just want to say thank you so much to all the League members for all of your incredible work this election season. You do amazing work every year. This year in particular, I feel like the incredible turnout, get out the vote efforts that you've made and the educational programs that you've had. We just really appreciate all the work you do in our community. So thank you very, very much. We do have people attending in both person and via Zoom, like I said. So we have a couple Zoom housekeeping items. If you're on our Zoom and you want to ask a question during the Q&A portion of the event, please use the chat feature. We ask that you use the little drop-down menu to select everyone before you type in your question so everyone can see what questions are being asked. We'll do our Q&A after the presentation. And for those in the room, I'll walk around with this microphone. I'll do a little Phil Donahue. So if you'd use the microphone to ask your question, that way our folks on Zoom can be sure to hear what's being asked in the room. We are recording this presentation, so it will be available the next day or two on both the League of Women Voters website and the library's YouTube channels for viewing. And now I'd like to welcome Barbara Hoppe of the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Lauren Williams and the Columbia Public Library for co-hosting this Lunch and Learn program every month. We have the pleasure today of introducing Rudi Keller, who's going to talk about the issues that are on the November 6th. And I just want to give a pitch for early voting right away, and then I'll say it again at the end of this. We have no excuse, early voting. Starting October 22nd, and there's little cards in the back. You can pick it up, and it's early voting at the early voting at the county clerk's office, and then there's some other spots for particular dates that you can vote. I think that's a big thing and an important thing for everyone. Then getting back to introducing Rudi Keller. I learned a few things that I don't know how I do. Rudi is a native of Louisville, Kentucky, and graduated from the University of Missouri Journalism School in 1986. And he worked for as a legislative reporter for the United Press International. And then I spent 22 of his 32 years in journalism covering Missouri government and politics for the Columbia Daily Tribune. And he won a variety of awards for news, state news, and investigative reporting. And then while working on at the Columbia Daily Tribune, he covered some important investigative stories, Trillium Memorial Veterans Hospital, and the flood of 1993, if you all remember that, and hopefully we won't have one again. He presently works for the Missouri Independent and writes thorough and insightful articles covering the state budget and the legislature. I know you always go there to learn what's happening. And I just say a little bit about the Missouri Independent. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit news organization covering state government, politics, and policy. It's staffed by veteran Missouri reporters and dedicated to a mission of relentless investigative journalism that sheds light on the issues. So with that, I give you Rudi Keller.
All right. Thank you, Barbara. Is this on? Can everybody hear the? Okay. Well, this is Lunch and Learn. I see the learners here. I don't see any lunch. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So, you know, it's been an interesting year for ballot measures. In the spring, we watched the legislature fight over whether or not to raise the threshold for passage of a ballot measure proposed by initiative petition. That failed. So all of the measures that we'll have on the ballot this year statewide will be voted on and determined by a majority vote. So 50% plus one will decide these issues. If you've someone who watches television like I do, especially sports, now that the Kansas City Chiefs are looking for a third Super Bowl, or the Kansas City Royals are in the baseball playoffs for the first time since their Super Bowl win in 2015, you're probably seeing a lot of commercials about sports wagering. And that is looking like it's on track to be the most expensive ballot measure campaign that has ever been conducted in Missouri history. The 2006 stem cell initiative campaign, if you'll remember, they spent about $31 million, but it was all on the side asking people to vote for it. There was minimal spending against it, but this is a fight between FanDuels and DraftKings on one side, and Caesars casinos on the other. Caesars is the company that operates the Boonville Casino, in case you're wondering, where they have several properties in town. But let's go through the it's just the way. Okay, so let's go through the ballot measures real quickly. Then we'll go a little bit more in depth. You've got Amendment 2 is your sports wagering amendment. Amendment 3 is reproductive health care. Amendment 5 is a new casino license for near on the Osage River near the Lake of the Ozarks. If you're wondering what happened to Amendment 1 and Amendment 4, we voted on them in August, and they are numbered in the order in which they are certified by the Secretary of State for the ballot. So Amendment 6 is court fees for retirement plans. This was the first 3 on this list were put on by initiative petition. The next 2, 6 and 7, which would ban ranked choice voting and restate a ban on non-citizen voting, is Amendment 7. Proposition A is a statutory initiative to change the minimum wage. So let's go get a couple of important points on each of these. It's covering over my header, but that's all right. This is Amendment 2. It legalizes wagering on professional and college sports. And not going to read these points to you. There we go. But when if you go to the casino over in Boonville and you walk away $100 lighter, $21 out of that $100, 21% goes to the state, and it goes to education programs. The same thing is going to be true for the taxes from sports wagering. By a provision of the state constitution, all money that's earned from gambling taxes is dedicated to education programs. In this case, the tax will be 10%. So that's, but they will be able to subtract out the provisions, track out the promotional items. So if you've seen an ad for FanDuels or DraftKings or Caesars sports wagering, they'll often tell you can get $200 or $500 or $1,000 in free bets or promotional bets. So this is how the math will work. Let's assume you have $1,000 that you deposit, and they give you $1,000 of free bets. And then you win $800 from your 1,000, which means you actually lost $200 to the casino. Then you win $500 back from your free bets. And so they've paid out $500 in actual cash. So now their losses are $700. And then they claim they gained $200 and lost $500. So it's net $300. But then they claim the $1,000 they gave you in free bets, which does not represent money, as a deduction against what they've earned. So your net, they'll report on that particular set of transactions is negative $1,300. So the opposition campaign says this is why it means there is no guarantee of additional money. The sports wagering people think that sports wagering will be so popular that within the first 5 years, it will generate an extra $100 million for education. Now, let's just put that in kind of perspective. The state spends nearly $4 billion just on public schools through the foundation formula and for transporting school students. The Department of Higher Education receives an appropriation of about $1 billion. The University of Missouri's portion of that is in the neighborhood of 500 million. So that's the magnitude of what they're saying they're going to add to Missouri's budget if this passes. There will be $5 million to help people who are problem gamblers. As I said before, FanDuel's DraftKings and FanDuel have provided $25 million for this campaign since June 30th, not counting what it costs to get it on the ballot. And Caesars Casinos has contributed $10 million to an opposition campaign since June 30th. So now let's move on. We've got reproductive health care. Now, this is the measure that would restore the abortion rights as they were understood under Roe v. Wade prior to 2022. The provisions would limit the legislature's ability to put restrictions on that right. So, but it will have to be determined by the courts. For example, prior to the ban going into effect in 2022, a woman seeking an abortion had to visit the doctor and the clinic that was going to provide it, receive a significant amount of information about fetal development, and then was told to come back in 72 hours if they really wanted to continue with this and receive medications that would abort her fetus. Well, those restrictions will have to be tested in court. Whether or not those will remain in place, exactly what the legislature can do, but because it does say that the regulation cannot interfere with, delay, or otherwise restrict a woman's abortion deemed medically necessary for the life or the health of the woman. Now, this is in the post-viability period. So, and the other restrictions pre-viability are for a compelling government interest achieved by the least restrictive means. Now, if you know what that means that it's up to the courts to tell us what those restrictions can and can't be. There are protections for other forms of reproductive health services, prenatal care, childbirth, access to contraception. The decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, there was in Judge Thomas's dissent or concurring opinion, he suggested that the Supreme Court could reverse the decisions that were based on privacy previously that said you can use contraception in your own home. So the campaign for passage is being funded by, there's no getting around it. It's a liberal dark money group. We hear the term dark money and you go, that dark money group is funding the right-wing campaign. And you go, oh, that's horrible. And then you find out that a dark money group is funding a campaign you might agree with. And you go, well, okay. Well, if you don't like the fact that donors are not being disclosed, that is what is going on in this campaign through a couple of funds that operate out of Washington, D.C. and then report to the IRS. This is all because of Citizens United, the decision that said corporations are people and can spend money on elections. The opposition campaign is really not in any large degree, showing itself with television ads or that kind of thing. They've raised about $600,000, so I would expect your mailbox will be filled with things that tell you to vote against Amendment 3. One interesting thing that we're working on a story right now is that the company that controls the assets that are owned by the Lamar Hunt family, the family that owns the Kansas City Chiefs. The only ads that are on the air against Amendment 3 are being funded by money donated by that company, and they've donated $100,000 to the opposition campaign. So, you know, don't think that your sports teams aren't involved in politics beyond the sports wagering. So casino near the Lake of the Ozarks. This is an idea that has been tried many times. The Osage Nation of Oklahoma has come to Missouri and said, we want to have property. They've gone to the federal government and said, this is part of our ancestral lands. Therefore, it needs to be taken into trust for the tribes so that they can build a casino, hotel, and convention center. What Amendment 5 asks us to do, funded by Bally's, one of the major casino companies and a major developer near the lake, is let's have a new private casino at the lake and take advantage of all those people who are at the lake for tourism and to enjoy their lake properties. It's been an expensive campaign, nothing like the one that is going on sports wagering, but they've got about $5 or $8 million that they're getting ready to launch a big television campaign and other efforts to get you to pass this casino at the Lake of the Ozarks. There's no well-funded opposition. This is a situation where the money left behind by the gamblers would be taxed at 21%. There's no guarantee for the Osage Nation casino that any money comes to the state of Missouri because they are a sovereign nation recognized by the United States government, and therefore any payment to the state of Missouri would be based on a negotiated agreement between the casino and the state of Missouri. The idea that they have a, you know, if Missouri were to not like the deal, it is possible for the federal government to impose that for the Osage Nation casino. So the question is, do you think Missouri needs another casino? Do you care? This is, you know, if you don't gamble, you know, I don't know whether this is something that you vote yes or no on. It just seems to be a, you know, this is not one that is going to change things statewide the way, you know, the abortion amendment will. So court fees for retirement plans. In 1983, the legislature established a retirement system for our elected sheriffs. There is also a retirement system for our elected prosecutors. For a long time, every time, you know, if you got a speeding ticket or if you were convicted of murder, there was a $3 fee added to your the costs in your court case, and that went to the sheriff's retirement fund. And the same thing with a $4 fee. The Missouri Supreme Court, reaching all the way back to the Magna Carta, because that's where the provision came from in the Missouri Constitution, said the courts are not for sale. And therefore, the $3 fee is an impediment to the courts. There has not been a court ruling on the $4 fee, but it's pretty much in the same vein. So they've created a constitutional amendment that says that these costs are reasonably related to the expense of the administration of justice, because a sheriff runs a jail, a sheriff provides security in courthouses in many places in the state. And so the elected sheriff should have a pension after he's done or she's done. The Missouri Sheriff's Association, there's been about $300,000 raised to try to persuade you on this. Ranked choice voting. This is a legislature initiated amendment. 2 years ago, an initiative petition attempted to put ranked choice voting on the Missouri ballot. And in a ranked choice election, you would have a list of candidates and you would say, this is my first choice. And if that first choice, if no one got a majority of the first choice votes, then the candidate who came in last, would the votes from that person would be, okay, who is this person's, who are the votes that are second choice for all the people that voted for the person who came in last? We will assign the second choice votes to the first choice tallies. And if somebody now has a majority, that makes them the winner. Alaska has adopted this, and opponents to Alaska's ranked choice voting before it came about are now some of its biggest supporters. But what this would do is, until someone came along with another initiative to amend the Constitution to change what this would put in the Constitution, Missouri will not have ranked choice voting. That means that, for example, the city of Columbia could not decide that for its municipal elections that it was going to do what St. Louis is doing with preference choice voting. It's similar to ranked choice voting, but this will allow it to continue in St. Louis. So they're not telling St. Louis, don't do what you're doing anymore. They're saying we'll allow it because the legislature knows that if you tell somebody don't do something you're doing that they like, they're going to vote against the thing that you want them to vote for. So no other community in the state has the preference choice voting. So basically this will have an impact on choices made at the local level until someone comes along with another constitutional amendment to put ranked choice voting on the ballot statewide. It bans ranked choice voting, but it's not forever because you can always go back and change the Constitution. There's a second provision in here. This was a provision that has got a lot of attention nationally. There is very little evidence that it is actually happening, and that is that non-citizen voting. So the Missouri Constitution since 1924 has said that all United States citizens shall have access to the ballot in Missouri. That was a change from the Constitution approved in 1865, immediately after the Civil War, that said when voting was restricted to men, that male citizens and male immigrants who had declared their intent to become citizens of the United States within the previous 5 years were eligible to vote in elections in Missouri. And the reason that this was done in 1865, along with a provision in the Constitution that said anybody who had engaged in rebellion or abetted the rebellion or somehow thought maybe once that the rebellion was a good idea, could not vote in Missouri. The group that was most likely to be affected by the allowance for non-citizen voting in Missouri were German immigrants. German immigrants were among the most radical anti-slavery people in Missouri before the Civil War, and the Republican Party had all their votes. And so with the Republican Party in charge, immediately after the Civil War, they wrote a constitutional provision to increase the number of people who were likely to vote for Republicans. This is a provision in 1924, the immigrant population had changed dramatically and they were voting Democratic. These were people from Eastern Europe and they were Catholic, and there was a fair number of Jews had arrived in Missouri from Eastern Europe and Russia at that time. And so these people, by a constitutional convention and vote of the state, were denied the vote in future years. There is a federal provision: no non-citizen can vote in a federal election. Missouri's Constitution already says that citizens have the vote. It doesn't have any allowance for non-citizens to vote. So the legislators who said that they wanted this in were pointing to places like San Francisco that had, through municipal laws, had allowed some non-citizens to vote in some instances. And they thought, well, maybe a charter city like Columbia or St. Louis or Kansas City might decide that they were going to put non-citizens on the voter rolls for their local elections. Proposition A, this is the last one on our list. the current minimum wage in Missouri is $12.30 an hour. The federal minimum wage is $7.25, but we don't have to worry about that because we got $12.30, right? Well, this would go to $13.75 on January 1st, $15 on January 1st, 2026. Now, you might wonder, how much is $15 an hour or $13.75 an hour in money for the course of the year? So we've got $25,000 and $500 is what you'd make if you worked full time at minimum wage now. That would be $31,226. So a single parent with one child or more than one child actually, who is making minimum wage now is eligible for Medicaid in Missouri, thanks to Medicaid expansion. Depending on how inflation goes, and those numbers are changed in 2026, that person could lose their Medicaid eligibility if this passes, but they would have heavily subsidized health care in other ways through the Affordable Care Act. So in my presentation, I've made a PDF of it that you can ask for if you're a member of the League of Women Voters. I think Barbara's going to send it out to her email list. These are links to stories we had on our website about these issues. And I just want to make sure that you know that it's available to you as you leave here today. And any questions now? Okay, we'll start there.
Number 2.
Uh-huh.
I've heard, vote for it, we'll be able to tax the money, so we'll benefit from it, but I gather from what you say that it's very negligible. I'm sorry, I use my hands.
Well,
that the amount of money they'll get is negligible, and we don't want to encourage betting, but apparently betting is here to stay on sports, and there's not much we're going to be doing about it with this measure. So I'm just not sure.
well,
And then I got a letter from somebody named Deborah saying, I'm a teacher and you want to vote against this. And
well,
that was suspicious.
that's both campaigns have enlisted quote unquote former educators, teachers to pitch their message.
Yeah.
How much tax money comes in will really determine it by the level of promotions that are made to get the new customers, will be determined by how many people get their start playing and how much they wager. Our tax system is very similar to Kansas. Kansas had in the first 2 years of sports wagering, $4.1 billion was wagered, and the net back to the state of Kansas was 18 million of that. There's right now every surrounding state but one allows sports wagering from a handheld. You can have your app on your phone and you can just be sitting in your living room and the Chiefs are on or the Royals are on and you think that next guy is going to get a home run or Patrick Mahomes is about to throw a touchdown pass, and you make a little bet. Well, if you go to St. Louis or Kansas City on a Sunday, then you can, and you go across the river or or across the state line, you'll see people with Missouri park license plates parked lined up because they've gotten outside the geocache restricted area and they can make their bets. People from Missouri are going to Kansas and Illinois and other states to make their bets. In Kansas, the money goes to a program that would hopefully for them get the Chiefs or the Royals to cross the line. Unfortunately, the people who are supporting Amendment 2 have yet to make that part of an ad for the Kansas City area. So it is confusing, but the taxes are probably less important than whether you think, there's some tax money that is going to our adjoining states that is coming out of Missourians.
That's about it. Also, we don't have any guarantee that the money really is going to end up for education.
Oh, yes.
We do.
Any net taxes minus the money going to sports wagering, or going to problem gambling solutions, is for education. That's part of the state constitution. All net lottery proceeds, all net from the money that is taxed out of casinos goes to education programs.
Isn't that possible that, as I understood, that the legislature can just, decrease their contribution towards education by the same amount?
The only thing in state law that determines how much goes to education is a provision that says 25% of state revenue goes to education. So, and it is substantially more than 25% of general revenue. We have a question on the back.
Just, I understand that this happened before on some kind of betting
Okay,
and that the money did go to education, but then the budget was reduced by that amount so that the amount of money that education got didn't go up.
well, the lottery was sold in 1984 as benefiting education. The language that allowed a lottery directed the money to the general revenue fund. When people said, well, where's the lottery money going? It's just, because the general revenue fund pays for everything. So if $1 of general revenue is spent, maybe 20 cents is going to Medicaid, and maybe 5 cents is going to higher education, and 30 cents is going to public education. So you can't follow any particular dollar. So then they had the bright idea, let's put a constitutional amendment on. Tell everybody, you vote for this and all the gambling money goes for education. Well, okay, so they did that. And the next year, it was held out on a separate line, lottery proceeds for education funds, so much money to the University of Missouri. Well, there wasn't as much general revenue left in the University of Missouri's budget line after they added the lottery proceeds for education. Now, it may have been total more than it was when it was merely a general revenue line. But if you look at the general revenue line is less. It happened also in state parks. Our 1/10 cent sales tax for state parks was passed. And within a few years, all the general revenue that was previously going to state parks was being spent elsewhere. So it is okay, here's a question from Zoom. Where is the Osage Nation Casino being constructed? I am not 100% certain on the exact location. It is on the lake of at the Lake of the Ozarks. There was an old hotel property that they purchased the land for, and they have and the Osage Nation, I think, construction is already underway, because there are certain types of games they can have without an agreement with the state, such as bingo. So I don't know if anybody has ever driven through Oklahoma and seen the large bingo parlors with the kind of money that they have. So yeah, we have a question over here. Here we go.
My question has to do with Amendment 6.
Okay.
And I saw in your presentation, and I've seen elsewhere, the citation of the amounts of $3 and $4. But when I look at the legislation, and when I look at the wording on the ballot, it does not specify an amount.
Right.
So can you help me understand that?
Okay, so the constitutional provision is merely to alter the Supreme Court's decision from 2021. It's enough language to tell the Supreme Court that this is a legal, that the people of Missouri consider this to be essential to the administration of justice. And so when the $3 fee that is in statute would start being collected again. The statute, I don't know how many of you really know this, but if a law is declared unconstitutional, either by the Missouri Supreme Court or the United States Supreme Court, the language of the law continues to be on the books. It takes an affirmative act of the legislature to remove it from state law. there is still a state law that says you can't burn a flag without a criminal penalty. There is not a state law that says two people of the same gender cannot engage in sexual relations. That was repealed by the legislature, but it was years after the Supreme Court had ruled that in a privacy case that you could not charge people for what they do in the privacy of their own home as consenting adults in a sexual way. So the $3 is in statute. The statute is in suspension right now. If this passes, the $3 would start being collected again.
Until altered in the future by the legislature, who could increase that. at
Yes, they
their
could increase it.
discretion.
If the pension fund were to not be taking in enough money with the revenue and the earnings on investments to maintain itself, then yes, that fee could be increased. So we have a question online. Have you ever had a story about exactly how much money actually goes for education from our casinos? Yes, we have reported that at various times. Maybe not, maybe I need to make sure that as I'm working on a story about this piece of legislation that I make sure that people understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. I talked about the size of the total budgets for education earlier. The lottery produces in the neighborhood of 375 to 390 million these days for education, and casinos produce a similar amount. So, maybe $800 million, $750 million out of a $5 billion or so education budget. It's not insignificant. It would certainly cause a lot of problems if that revenue were to go away and there wasn't a way to replace it. There's another question on Amendment 3. Are there any provision that provides care to transition as a transgender person? I heard this on social media. No, there is nothing in Amendment 3 that deals with the medical care of someone who got gender dysphoria. There is the legislation that is currently on trial, has been on trial in Jefferson City, banning those medical treatments. This would not change that in any way. All right, who else has a question?
I'm just curious on Amendment 3, why they wanted it as a compelling state interest, because the state feels they have a compelling interest to not have abortion already. So isn't that just sort of saying, okay, we'll just pass a law that says to forbid abortion and you're done with it? I mean, I don't know why they worded it that way.
Well, it's to say that you can't have you can't restrict something without showing a compelling governmental interest. That is a phrase used in legal in law for all sorts of things. Anytime if they wanted to say that you could not protest, I'm trying to think, you could not protest the war in Gaza on the front lawn of the Boone County Courthouse. If you said, you can't keep me from protesting the war in Gaza on the steps of the Boone County Courthouse, it is by definition, a public forum. It is public property. It is where the will of the people of Boone County is expressed in its county government. Well, if you sued over that restriction, then the county or whoever made that restriction would have to show a compelling governmental interest in keeping you off the lawn of the Boone County Courthouse. It couldn't be that, it costs us money to maintain the lawn. It can't be that, we just don't like you. It has to be, there is some security issue involved in limiting where you can exercise your First Amendment rights. So that's where the phrase compelling governmental interest comes from. If the language is there, it's speaking to the courts. And
history of what that means.
Yeah, there's a, yeah, it's very much as our resident attorney has told us, it is very well developed case law on the issue of what constitutes a compelling governmental interest. On abortion, preventing abortion past viability is considered to be have a compelling governmental interest that overrides the you know, unless there's a medical need or a life of the mother issue involved, the compelling governmental interest in it is that viable human being is someone we need to go to work and pay taxes. That is someone we need, you know, to be alive. And so the compelling governmental interest is in overweighs the choice once the fetus becomes viable. Does anybody have another question?
Oh, I just have a quick one. This is going back to Amendment 2. I've heard some concerns because of the wording in the amendment that says that, you know, the proceeds would go to education. I've heard some people express concerns that that would not necessarily just be to public education, but that some of those funds might also go to private education in our state. Have you heard that, or is that even feasible?
Well, the only money that right now goes to any kind of private education that comes from our gambling proceeds or our general tax dollars are scholarship funds that are provided by the state. If you're a student at Washington University or St. Louis University, you're eligible for a state-funded student grant. There are no direct appropriations to not to private schools at the state level. So there is a recently expanded program of tax credits for scholarships for students who go to private schools. But I guess if DraftKings or FanDuel or one of these casino companies made a donation to that fund and then took the tax credit against their gambling taxes, that would be how to get it there. But this will, there is, I've studied the budget and I'm racking my brain as I'm sitting here trying to think of an appropriation of any significant amount that is spent to support a private school. Yeah. Okay, I've got another one. So who is funding the pro and opposition of Proposition A? Now that's the minimum wage increase. And actually, as I pointed out for the abortion amendment, it is liberal dark money groups are one of the main sources of funding for the minimum wage. There's something called the 1630 fund. If you've ever heard of that, that is one of those you might want to research to figure out whether or not you think that you're aligned with them or not. But the 1630 fund is, once again, then there are local Missouri organizations. None of these ballot measures are being funded entirely by dark money groups or money outside of Missouri. There is substantial money from a Missouri organization called Missouri Jobs with Justice. They have worked on these issues since the first ballot measure on minimum wage in 2006. And so these are Missouri people. They have just there are organizations in Washington and elsewhere that are willing to fund these kinds of ballot measures in states that have Republican-controlled legislatures that won't consider them. There's another question. Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering if you could revisit the amendments that you said were put forth by the legislature, and what does that mean exactly? Did the gambling companies come to them and say, we want this on the ballot, or just some clarification on that?
So the sports wagering, Amendment 2, sports wagering, Amendment 3, reproductive health care, Amendment 5, the casino near the Lake of the Ozarks, and Proposition A for the minimum wage were all placed on the ballot by initiative petition, and that means gathering signatures in 6 congressional districts and meeting the thresholds required. Amendment 6 and Amendment 7 were placed there by the legislature. That means a bill like one that would be presented to the governor, but it's called a joint resolution. It doesn't go to the governor, it amends the Constitution. It takes a majority vote in both houses of the chamber of the legislature to place it on the ballot. And so, for example, the court fees on Amendment 6, well, the sheriffs and law enforcement and prosecutors are pretty powerful lobby groups. And so since that 2021 court decision, they've been working on the legislature to get this on the ballot for them. The ban on ranked choice voting, once again, a reaction to a previous initiative or some action outside the legislature. And so they have voted within the legislature to put these on the ballot. So it actually, you know, it's not an easy process to get on the ballot either for an initiative petition or in the legislature with these constitutional amendments. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm sure there are at least 100 constitutional amendments proposed in this year's legislature, and these are the 2 that got through. There are in excess of 200 proposals for initiatives, including multiple versions of what we're voting on, that were proposed and brought to the Secretary of State's office. And, you know, only 4 of them actually engaged in a significant signature campaign. So, I mean, yeah, you can, it is a lot of work to get anything on the ballot either way. But, you know, if you got lobbying power and a friendly legislature, that gets your measure on the ballot without you having to spend $3 million hiring people to collect signatures.
I have a couple of questions on Amendment 6, if I've got the time. Being fairly new to Missouri, has the state, other than what is going on from 83 to 2021 to support retirement funds, have other retirement systems been tried before and failed? And so we ended up with this fee?
Okay, so there is a retirement system called the Local Area Government Employees Retirement System. And this is a retirement system where I think, for example, Columbia and has its firefighters, and the Daniel Boone Regional Library employees are in. And every entity has what's called a contribution rate. And so as you pay your Social Security taxes, that's a contribution rate to Social Security. If you put money in a 401k, that's a contribution rate. If you're in, and these are like Social Security, these are defined benefit programs. You are eligible for so much based on how much you made and how many years you worked. And they are typically funded by, with, you know, payroll deductions. There is a, you know, at the state level, the state pays in excess of 20% of its payroll into the Mosers Fund, Missouri State Employees Retirement System. So every entity that as they join loggers has a contribution rate. I remember writing that the Columbia Police contribution rate was above 50% at one point because the actuarials, the people who tell you, are you going to have enough money in 20 years to pay everybody who you owe? Looked at Columbia's account and they went, well, you need to be putting this much in order to pay the benefits you've promised to everybody who is currently owed money up to this date, whether they're working or retired. And so the idea that you go outside of the employee payrolls or the employer, the amount of the money that the employer is paying out for payroll, and you go and you take money from court fees, well, that's a little different way of funding these pensions. Many sheriffs are eligible for a pension from loggers in it, and then they will also be eligible for a pension from the sheriff's retirement system. Now, I'd have to go and look. I haven't done the exact research to determine if Boone County Sheriff's Department, for example, is enrolled in loggers. Does that cover the sheriff, or would it only cover him if he was a deputy prior to being elected sheriff? So if many of these people who are elected sheriffs were previously deputies, and so, or worked in law enforcement elsewhere, and so would be eligible for a pension that way in addition to their sheriff's pension.
Do we have any data that, I'm always of the notion that you should be careful what you incentivize, but, and some of the opponents for this amendment say fees and fines are regressive taxes. Do we have any data that would support that from what's going on between 83 and 2021, that we were taxing the poor?
Well, there is a provision in the law for the fee that an indigent defendant does not pay that. So if you go into court and you're accused of assault, and your case involves the possibility of jail or prison time, then you're entitled to a public defender if you cannot pay for a public defender. So if you've had a public defender in one of these cases, you didn't pay the $3. So there is a limitation on who can pay it. But it still is the basic question that the Magna Carta was not written for the common people of England. The Magna Carta was written to determine the rights of barons and earls and counts vis-a-vis the King of England, so that the King of England couldn't say, if you give me 10,000 pounds, I will move your case up in the courts and I will give you a favorable ruling. That was what the provision of the Magna Carta was, that justice is not for sale. Well, that has been incorporated in U.S. constitutions on down through the years. And so the question here really is very fundamental on whether you want to create because if this fee is allowed, somebody asked, could they raise it? Well, if they determine that the actuarial said, you're not getting enough money to pay all the benefits you promised, that fee needs to be $5. It could become $5 or $10 or whatever the actuarial would say it would need to be in order to meet the obligations of the system. That's the way every pension fund works. I've sat through board of curators meetings at the university where they're cutting back on the amount of pension that they're offering to new employees. And they got a graph that says, this is how much we'll owe if we keep it this way. And this is how much we'll take in if we keep contributing at this level. And then they show, well, we'll have to contribute 50% of payroll. And no government agency wants to devote 50% of their payroll, equivalent of 50% of their payroll, to pension costs, because it means you don't give raises. It means you don't hire additional people if you need them. It's money that you promise to people and you have to pay.
The question, because originally this was Supreme Court struck down
Right.
what was in the statutes for laws.
Yeah.
This is, I don't, if I use the term anyway, it's a way to reinstate it. So the logic of why the Supreme Court struck it down is missing in a way.
Well, the Supreme Court struck it down because saying it violated the provision. A fee to pay someone's retirement has no logical connection to the costs of operating a court system. And so anything that the court charges you in a case has to be related to the logical costs of operating a court system. And the result being that that's why this is worded the way it is. If you go, as it was stated, there's nowhere in the amendment on the ballot language, or even if you go into what the legislature passed, there's no statement of the amount of a fee. The fee is going to be left to the legislature to determine in its infinite wisdom where it should be set. Yeah. Okay, so Boone County employees are covered under the statewide county employees retirement fund SERF. So, yeah, I did a story that ran this morning. You can go back and you can find it about the sheriff's retirement system deciding that the money that they've collected from $3 fees and the $2.5 million they were given from the general revenue fund to shore up their finances. Well, now they had enough money to put $30,000 into the campaign fund. Now there's the Sheriff's Association. That's dues paying, and they put money in, and the Prosecutors Association, that's dues paying, and they put their money in. But my story questions whether the $30,000 that came out of the retirement fund, which is supposed to pay for benefits, and they've been losing money anyway, is the correct use of that money. So I talked to the chairman of the Joint Committee on Public Employee Retirement, and he said any retirement system created by an act of the legislature is under his purview. And he said, I think that's about 140 systems. So you got loggers, you got county employees retirement fund, you've got prosecutors retirement fund, you've got the sheriff's retirement fund, there's a retirement fund that is only for MoDOT and highway patrol workers because the money comes out of the highway fund and that's dedicated money. You've got the Mosers fund, that is the general employee retirement. You've got the University of Missouri. Every four-year institution in Missouri except the University of Missouri is in what's called Mosers. The University of Missouri runs its own retirement system and has for many years. We got a question over here.
The city of Columbia Fire and Police are not in loggers. They're on the only end of the city. They're the only city employees that aren't in loggers. The fire and police are in Columbia are not in loggers.
Oh, well, okay.
A lot of news about it. So.
I remember the 50% contribution rate, but I must have misremembered who is where it's being managed.
City management who would like it to be in loggers, but the numbers scare them, so they don't do it.
I don't know that was that the city fire department is not, and police are not in loggers, right? And I want to ask Rudi to anybody. I have one question.
Right.
Hopefully a quick answer. I don't understand why should petition because the legislature is otherwise. The interesting question is, why does the legislature put something on the ballot that could pass it on their own?
Well, neither of the things that the legislature has put on the ballot is something that they can do on their own. They cannot, the legislature cannot alter the Missouri Constitution. So on the court fees, since the decision striking down the law that created the $3 fee was based on constitutional issues, only changing the Constitution can bring it back. Ranked choice voting, well, and changing the wording on the ban on non-citizen voting. Well, the ranked choice voting ban, I assume that they could put that in state election law, but there are powers that charter counties and cities have that are not covered by law, so that you'd have to write it so that it includes them. So they think that putting it in the Constitution, but the thing is, the next year, the legislature can come back and change its mind and strip out all that. To change this again, if the ranked choice voting ban goes in, to change it to allowing ranked choice voting would take another statewide vote. It's the reason we have things like legal marijuana in the Missouri Constitution. The reason we have Medicaid expansion in the Missouri Constitution is that if you remember something called puppy mill legislation from about a decade or so ago, this was a statutory change that put severe limits on dog breeders in the state of Missouri. And the dog breeders who had 50 to 75 to 100 female dogs and would ship their dogs out of the state and packed in cages to be sold at puppy stores and malls across the country, didn't like it. And they got the legislature to come back and they almost got it repealed entirely, but Jay Nixon wouldn't sign that. But Jay Nixon was willing to sign a much more limited changes to allow up to 50 female dogs at any particular dog breeder. So the folks who run initiative campaigns, you know, the Humane Society of the United States spent $10 million plus getting that on the ballot and passed. The people who are willing to spend $10 million to $12 million, like the ones who are backing Amendment 3, well, yeah, you could change the state law that currently says that abortions are not allowed in Missouri, except in a severe medical emergency for the woman. You could change that by a statutory initiative. It'd be easier to get on the ballot. It'd be the same threshold for passage. But in about 5 minutes, the legislature would have 40 bills that would repeal what you've just done. And in about 30 minutes after that, there'd be hearings because that's the politics of the Missouri legislature.
So I think that we're running out of time. So thank you so much for being here and for giving us.
Well, thank you all for being here and our audience that was on Zoom. And I really appreciate the questions were really good. I really appreciate it.
I want to add that the League of Women Voters has taken a position on 3 of the ballot issues, and you can go. We can't say which ones because of this forum being nonpartisan for this issue because of library policy. Yeah, but you can go and look. It's ballot. I can tell you which measures. Amendment 3, the reproductive rights. Amendment 7, the ranked choice voting, and Proposition A, minimum wage. We have taken positions, and please go to our website to see that. And I wanted to announce that our next Lunch and Learn is November 13th. It's with Randy Cole. It's about who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Columbia Housing Authority. And he will talk about affordable housing and creative choices. So that's a very important, timely issue after the election. So thank you so much for coming, and please grab one of these cards on your way out so you know about early non-excuse voting starting October 22nd. Voting at the county clerk's office, and then some other locations on the back. It's indicated. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
A lot to cover.
Did it work?
Yes.
Yeah.
When was the last time? I guess